For more than 2 decades, we've been educating our listeners about financial topics that are most important to you. Do you have enough money to retire? How will you keep from running out of money? What's your plan for managing market risk? What about taxes, inflation, and healthcare? Each week, we talk with an advisor at Lucia Capital Group about these issues and more. This is Managing Your Financial Future.
Well, I guess I should say Happy New Year to everybody. Now, when we're recording this, it's not the new year, but it is the new year when people are listening to this because we got to do these a couple of weeks in advance. So I'll say Happy 2026 to everyone. How's it looking? It's looking all right. A lot like 2025. Anyway, this is Managing Your Financial Future. I'm Johnny Dean, your podcast host. I think I did the same thing last year. Professor Rick Plum, certified financial planner professional and accredited wealth management advisor. I think I said the same thing. We tell people we record these early, so I'm assuming everything went according to plan on January 1st.
Sure. Hopefully we're on the air.
That's right. Yeah, I got to put enough quarters into the transmitter or whatever. Anyway, welcome to the program, and as I said, Happy New Year to everybody. Got a lot to talk about. Got a lot, not just in this episode, but got a lot to talk about pretty much over the next few months. Things changed. We got a couple of new laws, not quite as much, I think, as we had last year. But I want to talk today about this whole idea of conventional wisdom. Now, we have spent, you know where I'm going with this, Rick.
Conventional wisdom isn't conventional anymore.
It's not. It's not conventional, and I wouldn't call it wisdom either. We've spent a lot of time over the years talking about the problems with conventional wisdom in financial planning. Now, on the surface, generic advice can sound simple and harmless, but actually, when you dig a little deeper, you can find that these certain rules of thumb, not all, but certain rules of thumb, can either be misleading, incomplete, or I think in some cases just dangerous. Now, the real risk, of course, is that people follow these pieces of advice without understanding the long-term consequences, and I think sometimes that can cost you more than you realize. So today, we're going to look at a few of the biggest, I guess, offenders, I don't know, and kind of talk about why the common advice isn't always the right advice. I've come up with 3 of these pieces of conventional wisdom, but there are probably dozens, and these are 3 that I think we see most often dispensed just when you just ask some questions online or you read articles that may or may not have been written by someone who actually knows what they're talking about. So, Rick, it's not that this common advice is always bad, but just to follow it blindly without considering your own situation. I think you may be doing more harm than good. I mean, this isn't one of them, but one of the earliest ones we ever talked about was the whole idea of the 4% rule. You can only withdraw 4%.
Or should withdraw 4%. I mean, that's a guideline. It's a useful tool in very high level planning. But when it comes to actually creating your strategy when you get ready to retire or are retired, especially in the early years, that's not necessarily one that you need to follow. Yeah. Because lots of things happen through retirement. Some of it is that maybe you've postponed Social Security, so your income isn't where you need it to be yet, so you need more money from your assets. And then when you do start your Social Security, kick in a lot higher, you won't need anywhere near as much from your assets. It could be that your mortgage is going to be paid off in 7 or 8 years, and your income need goes down. And so I can take a little more now, and because I'll be taking less later. So it's just a matter of what is your situation and what's the best use of your money to meet your goals.
Yeah, so if you just thought that's all you could do was take 4%, then you're following conventional wisdom. You're not necessarily hurting yourself, but you could be. And that's what I said, if you're not considering something else.
Unfortunately, if people are only looking at that one supposed rule, they may think they have to have a ton more money than they really need to have to be able to retire, and that will cause stress. It'll make them continue maybe working in an area where they really don't want to be, which is no good for them or the people around them because they're not going to be happy at work, and they're not going to be, probably doing their best work, but they're just kind of toughing it out because they think they need this huge net worth, but they really don't need that big of a number because they didn't look at the bigger picture. Then in 4, 5, 8, 10 years, whatever it is, their Social Security kicks in. They're, like I said, those are the two biggest issues are either Social Security or an asset or an expense falls off, and they don't need as much. Right now, they know they need $8,000 a month, $10,000 a month, but a couple of years from now, they are going to only need $6,000, $7,000 a month, and the Social Security will be starting at it's $7,000 a month. What's that? $84,000 a year at 4%. I need over $2 million to provide that. Well, if I've only got $600,000-$700,000, I'm thinking I'm never going to make it. But and people do look at the math that way, and it's just not the right way to look at it.
Yeah, and you've seen. I mean, obviously, 4% you said is the guideline, and that's kind of a good starting point. If you try to take 10% out every year for the next 15 years, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble.
That's not going to work.
No, but there can be situations where you could, for a couple of years, depending on what your future looks like, and I think this is what you were saying, was that maybe you can do it for a couple of years. You've, I'm sure, done portfolios where they've taken out maybe 7-8% for a few years.
For 4 or 5 years, and then it drops down because of some known issue that's going to happen. Now, we're not talking about the unknown issues. We're talking about the known ones. And that, like I said, the two biggest ones are an income source starting up, Social Security, pension, something of that nature, or an expense dropping away, a mortgage on an investment property, where right now I'm getting basically break even, or I'm getting a couple $100 a month net profit from my rental property, but my $3,000 a month mortgage is going to go away 3 years from now. So my rental income is going to go from $500 a month to $3,500 a month, or my own mortgage goes away, or, something of that nature. No.
Well, yeah, and you said that these are known events that are happening. An unknown.
Yeah, I'm not talking about winning the lottery, making things better.
Well, and here's one that I've heard from people from time to time, and I'm sure you've had, where they said, well, you know what, I'm going to do this for a few years, but I'm expected to inherit something, my elderly parents or whatever, my father and mother.
Inheritances are a little tricky, though, because, unless the person is really close to, unfortunately, passing away, and the numbers are very well known, and a lot of times the heirs have an idea, but they don't know. What's going to happen, and they think, unfortunately, I've seen it where parents are loaded, but the reality is the parents weren't as loaded as they thought they were, and they're not getting anywhere near as much as they thought they were getting.
Well,
so inheritances are tricky to deal with.
Well, they are, and families, even if you know how much you're going to get, and even if you inherit something right on schedule. Families do some weird things, and
right on schedule.
Well, kind of. You say, well, when I buy my say my father is 93, he's unlikely to live to be 100, and he's not doing well. So my schedule would be sometime in the next few years.
In the next 5-6 years, 7 years.
Yes. Now, what this points out, and I'm making this one of the pieces of conventional wisdom, by the way, since we're talking about this, the 4% rule. Well, this shows the importance of communicating with your parents. Hopefully they will rely on this. Hopefully they'll be reliable here, because if you have parents with a considerable amount of assets, or even any assets, I think it's important that you meet with your advisor, have your parents go in and everybody talk and say, well, here's what we expect to get. Here's what you can probably look at. And just communication, I think, in this regard is probably better than not telling your kids. I would assume you run into this on both sides, where the parents say, you know what, I don't want any of them to know how much I have.
The older generation did not share information like that readily down the generational lines. And so you're talking about your client come in and then have the parents. Well, a lot of times the kids don't know what they're inheriting because the parents haven't told them, and me telling them to tell them isn't going to make them tell them. That's not going to happen. They're just not going to tell. And so that's why inheritances are tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So we try to do the best planning we can with the information that we have available, and when the numbers become more realistic, then we can build it into the plan. Or somebody, parents are worth $15 million and there's 3 siblings, so they think they're all going to get $5 million. Well, don't count on it as $5 million. Count it on as some lesser number, and if you can meet your retirement goals with a lesser number, you're pretty good. And if you think, Dad will never make it to 100. Murphy's Law says if you're planning on him passing away in the next 3, 4, 5 years, do your planning with him passing away at 105. Can you still make it work?
Or maybe just let's count out the inheritance for now.
And when it happens, if it happens, build it in. But some people don't have that kind of option. They need that inheritance, and then it's like, okay, well, you need to talk to your parents to make sure you're actually getting something.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to maybe meet with the advisor with your parents. All right, so we made this the first idea of conventional wisdom to debunk since we were talking about it, but it's one that we've talked about before, and I think it's important for people to understand that. The idea is you can only take 4% of your portfolio out every year. That's a starting point, it's a guideline, and then we move up and down kind of based on what's going to be happening, the certainties that are going to be happening with your life as you go on. All right, so that's the first one. Now let's get to the second one here, and this is one we've talked about also before, but it bears repeating, and that is always spend your taxable money first in retirement. I've seen this over and over and over, although I'll admit that lately
it's getting better.
It is getting better, and I think as time goes on, people start to see maybe that conventional wisdom isn't so good. Now, Rick, you can explain it, but the idea is that people often have, not always, but often have sources of pre-tax money, their 401k, IRAs, things like that. They have some personal money, maybe their brokerage account, things like that, taxable, and then they've got maybe some tax-free money, Roth. So when we talk about always spend your taxable money first in retirement, what is the conventional wisdom there?
Well, the long-standing conventional wisdom was that if you have the multiple sources of capital, taxable now, tax-free Roth, tax-deferred IRA type money, you spend your taxable money first. And the reality is that's going to give you the lowest current income tax bill going. That's the thought process. And you don't touch your IRA. If you can afford to wait long enough, don't touch your IRA money until you hit the required minimum distribution age, currently age 73. It's going to be age 75 in not too many years. So don't ever touch it, and then only take the required minimum distribution. And oh my gosh, for no purpose ever do you touch your Roth IRA. And it's like, well, then why do I have the dang thing? And I think that that's a horrible idea, because what that does is it's very short-sighted. It's saying I'm going to go on a very, very low income tax bracket today, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's short-sighted, because if I have, let's say I've got, $500,000 in IRA and $500,000 in personal account. I'll ignore the Roth for the moment. And I'm going to live on, at $1 million, call it 5% withdrawal, $50,000 a year. And so I'm going to put enough money in safe money to provide $50,000 a year. So $350,000 of my personal money is going to be in personal taxable accounts. But what's $350,000 going to earn today? About $10,000, $12,000 in interest. So I'm living, and then the other 150 is going to earn a little bit. So I've got a gross total income other than my Social Security of $15,000, $20,000, give or take. I'm taking $50,000 out. But with personal money, what I take out is not what's taxable. What it earns is what's taxable, whether I take it out or not. But at that point, I'm paying zero, nada, zilch, no income taxes, at least for a while. But I was 65 or 66 when I started this, and I had that $500,000 of my IRA invested for growth, because I'm not going to touch it for at least 7 years. And let's say that it earns the proverbial 10% in growth. That means that $500,000 is now going to be worth $1 million. Rule of 72. Anybody wants to know about the rule of 72? Let me know. 72 divided by 10, 7.2. 7.2 years to double. 500,000 doubles to $1 million in 7.2 years. We're rounding here. So my IRA is $1 million. My required minimum distribution is around $40,000. Presumably now that I'm 73 or 75, I've started my Social Security. I'm getting my Social Security. And with $40,000 of required minimum distribution, I'm going to pay taxes on my Social Security benefits as well. So I went from being in a 0% negative tax bracket, not paying any taxes, to paying quite a bit of taxes going forward for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not good planning. Rather than living on personal money only, there's two really good options here. One is to start blending the distribution, taking some from my personal account, but some from my IRA, and paying no taxes on the money that I'm taking out of the IRA because I'm keeping it under the threshold for taxation. Or And that one works fine because it stagnates the growth. Now my required minimum distribution may only be $20,000 when I get to 73 or 75, keeping my taxes low for the rest of my life, also keeping less of an impact on the taxation of Social Security. Or the other one, especially if I'm deferring taking my Social Security right now, continue to take just the money I'm going to live off of from my personal money. That's fine. But don't waste good. If I've got a 0% tax bracket, do Roth conversions while I'm waiting for the IRA so that A, stagnates the growth in the IRA, moving it over to the Roth IRA, keeps me in a low tax bracket, and makes life a lot better. So that's, I think, the best option. So I guess in technical terms, I am spending my personal money first, but I'm not giving up that good low tax bracket. I am taking advantage of that by using Roth conversions. But that second part of that is not part of the original common wisdom. They just say, don't ever touch it. They don't say convert it. They say, don't touch it.
Yeah, and you've just enumerated why that's wrong. And
Roth IRAs are the wild card in this because it all depends on how big the Roth IRA is. Mm-hmm. But if I've done very well and I've got a good-sized IRA, I've got a good-sized personal account, and I've got a decent-sized Roth IRA, maybe taking a distribution from a Roth IRA to satisfy some of my income needs will keep me under the IRMA limit, and I won't have to pay the additional Medicare tax. Maybe it keeps me under the, any one of the other little, ticking time bombs that are landmines, I should call them, inside the tax code that you can avoid. Maybe it keeps my Social Security out of taxation for now. But, like I said, the Roth is a wild card. I typically generally look at it first to be all growth, because especially for a married couple, because I'm looking for not just the current tax situation where there's a married filing joint return. I'm looking at the future unfortunate issue of a survivor issue, and having Roth available for that survivor may be significantly more important than having Roth available for the joint married filing return because of the way that the taxes work. And so, but I'm looking to tax manage my distributions, not just listen to some arbitrary spend this first.
Well,
dumb crap.
Well, yeah, and you've seen the consequences for now.
I've seen problems especially for the survivor. They lose one of their incomes because one of the Social Security goes away, and their taxes more than double. So their income goes down and their expenses go up.
Well, you talk about
not the best recipe.
You talk about planning for events that are going to happen. In most cases, vast majority of cases, one spouse goes before the other. It's rare, I think, that they go together. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, very quickly on this idea of spending taxable money first in retirement, I got to think that there are some situations where people have either only taxable money, say their 401ks or IRAs, because that's where they've been doing all their savings, or most of it is in that pre-tax. What do you do in that particular incident?
Well, then we look at what is going to happen. But obviously, if the only thing I have is, the $1 million that I was talking about before is all in my 401k, no, call it an IRA. When you retire, you're going to roll it to an IRA. But no matter what I do, it's going to be all taxable. Now it's a matter of, should I accelerate some income? I mean, I know I'm going to be taking, my $40,000, $50,000 out. Do I have the ability to take more without adversely affecting my overall income situation? And that would be the Roth conversions and things like that. Or should I defer taking some of my Social Security, or one or the other individual Social Security, take a larger distribution from the IRA, break the 4% rule, take a 7 or 8% distribution for the next 5 years, and then kick in my age 70 full Social Security benefit and drop the distribution from the IRA to more of a RMD style 4 or 5% of a smaller number. Because, hey, if I've been taking 8 or 9% out for the next 5 years, that IRA isn't growing. In fact, it's probably diminishing a little bit. But then when I do need to, when I do start the Social Security, I may only need to take a little bit out, and that gives a much more tax sensitive, less of my Social Security is going to be taxable, less of the IRA is going to be taxable. It's just a better tax situation. So it may be better in the planning process if we can defer a Social Security, take more from the IRA early, or we look at the other side. If we're already taking the Social Security, if you're already doing that and you're still taking a 4 or 5% distribution from your IRA, you're probably never going to be in a different tax bracket unless you inherit money. All these things come full circle. And so we have to look at that. But it may be that you just take what you can live on.
Yeah. And again, for people who are saying, well, gosh, if you're taking more out of your IRAs or your pre-tax, that means your tax bill is going to be higher today. And as you kind of said a little while ago, sometimes it's more about managing your taxes over the long haul than it is trying to pay the absolute lowest amount that you can today. So just something to keep in mind. Always spend your taxable money first in retirement. Not necessarily the case. And as I said at the beginning, if you follow that to the rule, to the letter, you could actually wind up paying a whole lot more in taxes for the rest of your life. All right, so that's the second idea of conventional wisdom that we like to debunk. The third one is this, and I'll word this carefully, but the idea that your spending needs will rise consistently after you retire. Now, I've heard people say your spending needs will go down as you retire. Rick, all of the research seems to indicate that there is what they call a retirement smile, and I know you've heard about this. The spending needs. Now, many, let's say, portfolio models will tell you, okay, take a certain amount each year, and then we're going to have to add 2% for inflation, every year, or some number for inflation every year. So between ages 65 and let's say 95. If you're taking out, $50,000 a year or whatever it is at age 65, by the time you're age 95, you're going to need to be taking out, I don't even know, I'm sure you can do the math, but something maybe closer to $90,000 or $100,000 a year.
More like 105.
Okay, $105,000.
That was at 2.5%. That's basically where we're sitting.
Right, which means that if I got a plan for taking $105,000 a year out at age 95, I better have a ton saved up. Rick, just in the time we have left, which isn't a lot.
And if I go by the 4% rule, that means I need $2.6 million in my portfolio by the time I'm 95 to be able to take 105 out at 4%. Well,
so realistically, that is not the case, because if you're 95, chances are you're not going to be spending that much money. Talk about that, if you would, for a moment.
Well, inflation does affect what we buy. There's no way around it. And to be honest, the COLA on Social Security doesn't keep up with real spending or real inflationary issues. But what we've seen is that people that retire in their 60s, the earlier you are in your 60s, spending actually goes up a little bit or a lot in the first 5, 6, 7, 8 years of retirement. But once you get into your 70s, mid to late 70s and beyond, spending either plateaus or comes down a little bit, because although each item that you're buying is more expensive than it used to be, you're not buying as many items. You find out that you don't need to have 2 full meals. A lot of times we see people, not because they're on a budget, but because they just can't eat that much. They split meals, husband and wife. And so what I've seen just from anecdotal watching people retire for 40 years is that spending tends to plateau, and it doesn't go up, even though inflation is there for the most part. As you get into your 80s, late 70s and early 80s, you typically are not driving as much, so you're not spending as much on gas and things. These things don't cost as much, or you don't spend as much as you go along. And while inflation is propping up prices, that's why it's staying flat and not coming down. That's why it plateaued instead of coming down. Mm-hmm. But it's only in the last couple of years for most people, unless you're chronically ill, that the medical expenses really hit hard, potentially. And hopefully we've done long-term care insurance or something like that to maybe alleviate some of that. But typically it's only the last couple of years. And the reason the 4% rule doesn't work on these things is because by the time you're 95, the idea of the 4% rule was to provide a stable, predictable cash flow, so they say, for 30 years. Well, if you're 95, it's unlikely that you're going to need cash flow for the next 30 years. I don't think anybody's made it that far yet. So it's just.
I think one Japanese lady and a French lady.
125?
I think it was 122. I think they made it. Yeah, I think that's.
So I'm still standing cool. Nobody's made it to 125. Nobody's done the 30 years in there.
Yeah.
I don't know. But spending typically plateaus. Now, that's not in the 60s, but 70s and later, it typically plateaus. So And the problem also is that most financial planning softwares,
Mm-hmm.
when you use a financial planning program, pre-assumes that you're going to have a constant rate of inflation every year. Like we just did a 2.5%. So that's saying by the time you're 95, if you started off with 50,000 a year, you're going to need 105,000 a year to buy the same goods and services, and that's at 2.5%. And so do we really need to have that big of a portfolio? So that would mean that if a 95-year-old maybe has a 4 or 5 year life expectancy,
Mm-hmm.
give or take, I would need $500,000 in my account still at that point. And that's
probably not realistic, is what you're saying. That's
it
not
may or
how
may
it
not
works.
be, and that's just to provide 5 years worth of spending, not anything else. The reality is, spending typically plateaus, with the exception of life events that are outside of your control, which unfortunately you have to account for at times.
Well, we're talking healthcare mainly. Now, I don't want to ignore that aspect of it, because obviously as you get older, maybe Medicare may not cover everything. You may be spending a little bit more on healthcare. You have seen that toward the end of life, which is the kind of,
that increases the spend down quite a bit from a 4% rule to significantly more. And now it becomes more of, okay, how do we keep from spending this so we have something left over for the kids and get the government to pay for our long-term care?
Well, that would be nice. Although, now I think people
harder to do.
Shift that burden to insurance companies, but then
you got to pay for it up front. Then
yeah. So there are ways to do that, but that's the other part of that smile. The increasing part of it tends to be the
later part of the years, the expenses potentially go up because of healthcare issues and spending of either long-term care or chronic illness.
Yeah, but so we only have a minute or two. But if you don't know exactly how much you're going to need to spend when you're 85 or 90, I mean, really, realistically, how do you plan for that? What do you do when you're trying to decide?
Well, it's hard. I mean, you have to at least put some thought process into it. And the hardest part is figuring out what you're going to spend, not when you're 85, but if you're retiring at 65. Just making up a number. It could be earlier, it could be later. The hardest part of that is figuring out what you're going to spend at 66, because you've never been retired before. Mm-hmm. You're just now retiring. So knowing what you're going to spend the first couple of years in retirement it's a crapshoot. We don't exactly know what retirement's going to look like. You have to learn to be retired and learn what's going on. And then once you've been retired for 4 or 5, 6, 7 years, you get a better feel for it. So once you've been retired, then it's easier to project out to 85, because once you're at 85, you've been doing the same thing for a long time. You've been retired. Most likely you've been retired for a long time. You got this thing kind of on autopilot now. So now it's easier to do. So the hardest part isn't the 85 necessarily. It's the 65, 70. It's the first couple of years of retirement, trying to figure out, what does retirement really look like? And once I get into retirement, are the things that I thought I wanted to do the things I really do want to do? Or have they changed now that I have time on my side? Of course, I say now that I have time on my side. Most of the people I know that retired recently, my age or a little bit older, are saying, time? I don't have any time. My schedule is so jam-packed, I don't even know where I had time to do anything, and I'm not even working.
Yeah, that happened to my parents. I remember they fell in love with traveling, which they thought about.
Not a problem.
But I mean, this was just, that became their thing. And so between that and my mom's doing volunteer work and all this other stuff, she says, I have less time now than I had when I was working, but I enjoy this. This is a lot more fun than working. So the three pieces of conventional wisdom that we've I think debunked here and continue to do so, just to summarize, are that the 4% rule is a rule. It's not. It's a guideline. We want to remind people of that, as we often do. The second one is you should always spend your taxable money first in retirement. Well, not necessarily. You may want to look into spending your pre-tax money before you're required to help take care of tax bills down the road. Looking at this long term. And the third thing is that your spending needs will rise consistently after you retire. I picked these three, as I said, because these are the ones that seem to come up the most, at least the ones that I've seen. I'm sure you've seen a bunch of others, Rick, but I think these are the three that are most common, and the three that can come up and bite you, they have the highest chance of coming back and biting you.
The ones that most people tend to follow without knowing why they're following them.
Yeah. And this is the kind of thing that you need to talk to a financial advisor about. These are the things that Rick Plum and the entire group at Lucia Capital Group, the advisors, do all the time with their clients. If you want to go over your portfolio and just check and see what's your potential spending going to be, what kind of rules are you following that maybe you didn't think you had to follow? Do you really need to save $2.5 million before you can retire? Maybe you can do so with significantly less. Check them out at Lucia Capital Group. Give them a call, 800-644-1150, 800-644-1150. That's Lucia Capital Group. Professor Rick Plum heads up the financial planning department there and has a hand in all of these. They all work together, much like a brain trust, and Professor Rick Plum oversees all the plans. 800-644-1150 at Lucia Capital Group. You can also go online. Don't forget, Lucia Capital, Lucia Cap, LUCIACAP.com. That's LuciaCap.com. Find information on this stuff. And again, download our guides. We get a lot of downloads every single week, so it's good that I keep talking about this. Go to the search bar in the top, type in whatever you'd like to download, whether it's a Social Security guide, it's an estate planning guide, it's a retirement guide, a spending guide, a buckets guide. It's all right there. Just type it into the search bar, and it should be the first thing that comes up. You can download it for free and read it and enjoy it. I think it'll be. I think you'll get some good knowledge out of that. Also, subscribe to the podcast, as I tell you every single time. Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You want to listen to this? Managing Your Financial Future. Not the catchiest title, but this is exactly what we do. Managing Your Financial Future, and we try to do this every single week. Listen and download to every single episode. I do think you're going to get something out of it. Professor Rick Plum, my thanks to you. It's been great, as always.
Thank you.
For
Happy
Professor
New Year.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay. Got to say it again. Happy New Year. Unless something glitches and this thing goes out on December 28th. I don't think it's going to do that. All right. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy 2026. For Professor Rick Plum, certified financial planner professional and accredited wealth management advisor, I'm your podcast host, Johnny Dean, managing your financial future. Yes, we will talk to you all again next week. The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice, and its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. There is no guarantee that any investment strategy will meet its stated objective. All investments involve risk, including potential loss of principal. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Lucia Capital Group is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. 401k benefits may be subject to change at your employer, the governing pension, or benefit organization's discretion. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. A plan participant leaving an employer typically has 4 options and may engage in a combination of these options. 1. Leave the money in their former employer's plan, if permitted. 2. Roll over the assets to their new employer's plan if one is available and rollovers are permitted. 3. Roll over to an IRA. Or 4. Cash out the account value. Roth IRA distributions of principal from a Roth IRA are tax-free. However, any earnings will be taxed at ordinary income rates, and a 10% penalty tax will apply if withdrawn prior to age 59.5 or within 5 years of the date the Roth IRA was established, whichever is longer. Long-term care coverage policies and provisions may not be available in all states. Approval may be subject to the terms and conditions of the insurance company. Insurance product guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are subject to their terms and conditions. Rick Plum is a registered representative with, and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and member FINRA SIPC. LPL Financial California Insurance License number 0518721. LPLIA California Insurance License number 0B91442.